Everybody has their own unique ideas about what makes a fighting game balanced. The sheer variety of games in the genre, as well as what different audiences look for in each game, make it nearly impossible to concretely define what makes something well balanced, let alone how to even go about balancing a game. The conversation typically revolves around having a roster with distinct characters, while leaving room for player expression, and having a near universally even matchup spread. But this could be a tall order seeing as so few games actually manage to maintain all these different values. Plus, leaning too far towards one of these values historically tends to compromise the others in some way. Extreme matchups, for example, are an inevitability in any game with a strong focus on character archetypes. And while some players can find enjoyment in overcoming tremendous odds, it's safe to say that many people would rather not have to go through an 80-20 matchup just because their opponent happens to play a character that counters theirs. In more recent years, developers have attempted to directly address this problem by homogenizing the cast to some degree, as well as making pretty drastic system changes that tend to water down the kind of player expression that makes fighting games appealing. To be fair, homogenizing a cast where every character has somewhat similar game plans and win conditions can make for a far more balanced game, and makes the process of learning matchups far less stressful for players. But when every character has access to many of the same tools and counters, you begin to lose what makes them distinct in the first place. Someone like Guile having pretty oppressive rushdown options in Street Fighter V is probably the clearest example of a character losing their identity for the sake of balance. The other option commonly adopted by modern games for the sake of balance has been to simplify game systems and mechanics, which can end up having the unfortunate side effect of alienating the more die-hard fans and creating divides within the community, which is to be expected when you remove an inherent appeal for a lot of people that already exists in previous games. With all this taken into account, it would seem difficult to actually have a game that manages to have both player expression and balance, as focusing on one seems to always compromise the other to some extent. There are, however, a variety of ways in which devs have managed to strike this perfect harmony between the two values, and it's primarily found in game-specific universal system mechanics. The more flexible of these mechanics can often act as equalizers for every character, regardless of playstyle or viability, to take advantage of to some extent. Many of these mechanics can admittedly be very polarizing, but when they work, they truly manage to pull off something special. And for me personally, my favorite instance of a mechanic like this would have to be custom combos from Street Fighter Alpha 2. Custom combo is essentially a state where every move becomes juggleable and cancelable with any other at the cost of whatever meter you may have, which basically opens up the floodgates for whatever insane strings you could imagine. While flexibility in combo routes is obviously there, it's also a system that awards situational awareness, as certain combos can become more beneficial than others based on positioning. The activation of the mechanic is one of the most interesting parts of it, and plays a big part in why it's even used in the first place. Known as the VACC, this exploit utilizes the blowback or activation of a custom combo at close range to make any low unblockable for about 8 to 10 frames. As you can imagine, this makes what would otherwise be a pretty situational tool into a game-changing threat that always sits at the back of your mind. Another important aspect of CC is its flexibility based on how you choose to utilize it, because, contrary to its name, it isn't a mechanic relegated to just combo use. There are pretty situational setups with CC that add an extra bit of decision making in your usage of the mechanic, and just about every playstyle or archetype benefits from it, which is where the balance part comes in. A grappler like Zangief, for example, can score a knockdown, then use the speed of CC to basically get SPD Oki at the cost of meter, which is just a thing of beauty to witness.
SPD? Big damage? Oh, that was cheap. Come on, bro. Oh, that was cheap, bro. What are you gonna do, bro? That was mad cheap. That was mad cheap, bro. Like, come on. I should put you in a loser's bracket just for doing some dirty ass shit like that.
With that being said, the implementation of CC in its most basic form still runs incredibly deep, and this combined with the ease of activation plays a huge role in making it the amazing equalizer that it is. When just about every character is given access to a tool with infinite juggle potential that can oftentimes do over 60% damage, as well as giving it situational use for just about every archetype, it strikes a perfect balance between allowing each character archetype to retain their identity and appeal, whilst not sacrificing balance and allowing for plenty of player expression. From the way I've described custom combos so far, it would be easy to imagine it as an over-centralizing mechanic. which in some cases would be a valid assessment. However, there are multiple factors that prevent it from becoming stale, barring the fact that it basically unlocks infinite combo potential. Its biggest weakness, for example, is that once activated, your character is forced to continuously walk forward with this huge launch of momentum only being cancelable with crouch, meaning on whiff you're pretty much screwed. Plus, there are plenty of situations where you'd rather spend that meter on a level 1, as characters like Rose have supers powerful enough that they can outweigh the benefits found in CC. When you also take into consideration things like alpha counters and other, admittedly volatile defensive mechanics of the game, you begin to realize that custom combo isn't some insanely broken, over-centralizing mechanic, but rather the same kind of powerful and prominent game-specific tool that exists in countless other fighting games. What we do end up with is an incredibly powerful tool that the entire cast has access to, in which just about every unique archetype can take advantage of in their own ways. But even with all of these reasons taken into consideration, what really holds this mechanic together is the fact that it's tied to meter. In Alpha 2, everything from your biggest sources of damage to your best defense and reversal options all use up meter. The same meter that can be saved for getting as much use out of custom combo as possible. This not only prevents custom combo from becoming too over-centralized, but also gives Alpha 2 an unparalleled level of resource management, which is always welcome in my book. With all this being said, you may wonder what point I'm even trying to get at by gushing over a nearly 30-year-old fighting game. Well, there's been a recent rise of totally respectful Twitter discussions pertaining to drive mechanics in Street Fighter 6, and whether it rewards footsies or panders to scrubby play. This discussion isn't at all new with modern FGC discourse, and there's been plenty of shitposty reactions to some of the more hyperbolic opinions. But amidst this endless stream of worthless fighting game banter and loose definitions of what footsies even are, I think looking back to older games could be somewhat helpful in this case. Playing older games and seeing how fundamentally different they operate can give plenty of insight when it comes to how you choose to engage in the genre. Do take this with a grain of salt, as I would consider myself a relatively casual fan of fighting games, but the perspective gained from older games can be incredibly valuable. Seeing as the undying Twitter discourse of balance and player expression in modern games continues to occupy our Twitter feeds and permeate just about everything modern players use to define their games, it's clear as day to see how an older game's unique take on these seemingly everlasting problems could still be relevant for a modern audience to at least take into consideration.